Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Self Mastery Sessions. Hope you guys are having an amazing day. Today, we're going to have a talk with our great friend and neuroscience PhD candidate. Today, you're going to learn so much about the brain. Trust me, this is going to be a fun ride. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. See you out there. So I got it loaded up right now. Camera's on, sound is on. Well, that's great. So we're on. What's up, guys? Welcome to 6th episode of Self Mastery Sessions. Today we have such an exciting day. We have our guest, Dr. Shafik. He's an amazing guy. We've been having this little conversation right now, and it's such a passionate guy. Really, you guys are going to have a great time, and I hope you guys get great value from this. But PhD candidate, Dr. Shafik, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, there's not much to say. I mean, you gave a great introduction over there. But yeah, I'm in my second year PhD right now, working with Dr. Greg Selassie. He's a doctor.
Yeah.
I have to go closer. Okay. So yeah, he's a doctor, and we're mostly focusing on stroke and stroke recovery in animal models, and we're trying to apply this from preclinical models and translate it into clinical ways of helping people recover after stroke and understand how the brain works. So yeah, basically I've went through the basic neuroscience training until I got into my current research, which is developing non-invasive techniques to help the brain recover. And specifically, when we say the brain, we look at the motor cortex, or the part of the brain that is responsible for voluntary movements. And that came back from background in preclinical work in virology that I've done in my undergraduate studies and undergraduate. We had that program called Translational and Molecular Medicine at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Ottawa, which kind of built my foundation for research and exploratory investigation on the brain and what happens to the brain in terms of like disease, injury, and neurodegeneration.
Well, that's perfect. So what we want to do today is you learned so much from neuroscience through time, right? Through your whole parkour, through school, and through the education system, you've learned so much about neuroscience. But well, there's some lessons we can take from neuroscience and bring it into self-improvement. And that's why we wanted to have you as a guest. And honestly, so excited to get this going. So JP, you can start with the first question, actually.
Well, first I want to ask you, what are some non-invasive techniques to get into the brain and play around with it?
Non-invasive things. That's a beautiful question, actually. That's kind of dwells into my own research. So currently we use something known as optogenetics. I mean, optogenetics comes from optics and genetics. Optics by meaning we're talking about light. Like genetics is like genetic manipulation in the body, and how can we make the body, or the brain specifically, respond to light stimulation. So in my research, I use something called a Thai-1 transgenic mouse model, which using some genetic approaches, we're able to manipulate the brain and have specific neurons in specific layers of the brain have channels that respond to light. So I'm going to simplify it a bit more. So everything I'm going to be talking about today is going to be a bit simplified, so for everyone to kind of follow along.
I'm not sure I would understand if not.
Yeah, exactly.
So those receptors, they sit on neurons, and this receptor usually opens up and allows the neuron to fire in response to a signal. And that signal, in our case, will be light. And the way we do it is that we manipulate the animal genetically before we breed them. We create generations of those genetically changed, modified animals that have cells that respond to light. And then what we do is we shine light through the skull, through the brain, without having to remove the skull, without having to touch the brain or damage its integrity or anything close to that. And as light hits through the skull into the brain, it lights on brain tissue. And those brain tissues have the cells in there. And those cells basically respond to this light, and they open up, allowing the neurons to fire, allowing the neurons to activate. So for instance, if you come to my lab, where we do those optogenetic procedures, we anesthetize the mice. We have them sitting there, anesthetized, head fixed, meaning that their head is positioned onto a articulating arm. They're asleep. They don't know what's going on. And we hit it with a specific wavelength of light into a specific position in the brain, And the next thing you would be seeing, if that position controls the forelimb or your arm, or the mouse's arm, sorry, you will see the mouse arm just jerk like that.
Wow.
And that is not a voluntary response, that's
Of course.
a evoked response. We evoke that
Okay.
response
Yeah.
using light. So basically, this is what optogenetics is. It's basically light control of specific population of neurons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we do it non-invasively. Comparing what the thing is, you say non-invasively, but we have to have a baseline of what is invasive in terms of those procedures.
Yes.
So we compare this specific procedure of what I like to call probing the brain. We probe the brain with light, meaning that we're poking the brain with light, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not poking it using electrodes. We're not poking it using anything else. So this is compared to a previous method. If you look into the literature and read a bit more about it, we call it the intracranial microstimulation. It's a mouthful of things. But really what it stands for is ICMS, which is essentially removal of the skull and inserting little electrodes in various places of the brain. And those electrodes, we can pass electrical signal through it, electrical current, and that electrical current creates a response in the neurons surrounding that electrode. And those neurons respond to that electrical stimulation and fire, essentially creating movement. So in an ICMS experiment, you would see the same thing, but instead of light, we use electrode. We put the electrode down deep into the brain, and if that region of the brain is responsible for the movement of the forelimb, you'll see the mouse or the rat moving its forelimb. It's a bit more invasive because getting in the brain, you're opening the skull, you're poking through the brain. In my case, we're keeping the brain intact, keeping the skull intact. We're going through light. So
And
that's the sorry. Go ahead.
does it damage at all the rat or the mouse after the experiment? Do they feel anything?
The
Does it
optogenetics
have
or
any lasting
ICMS?
effects? The non-invasive one.
The non-invasive one. Well, no, we hope not. I mean, the idea about why the brain is damaged in the previous experiment that I explained, the ICMS, is because anything that touches the brain tissue. I mean, not even removal of the skull itself could be damaging to the brain because you're messing with the brain integrity, or the homeostasis of how the brain is inside the cranial vault. So, like, imagine poking through it. So you're creating a crater as you're digging through with the electrode. So basically you're removing brain tissue as you're going in there. So removal of brain tissue could of course be damaging to the brain integrity and the way the brain is functioning. In our case, we're not doing any of that.
Yeah,
We're just
the way I kind of see it is you guys are kind of, it's going to sound so stupid, but you guys are kind of hacking a garage door. You're kind of going like in through Wi-Fi, if I can put it in really stupid terms.
It's like Bluetooth for your
It's
brain.
like Bluetooth for your brain. So to me, it's so impressive what you guys do. But you're clearly such a passionate guy about neuroscience, and through the discussions we've had like right before this episode, seriously, you blew our minds with whatever science. You
And like
just
45 minutes on that.
just throw some knowledge. What got you into neuroscience in the first place, and what got you to be so passionate about it?
I mean, that's an excellent question. What got me here? The thing is, the reason my passion for neuroscience was initiated in the first place comes from a family event that happened where someone close in my family had a brain injury, and that brain injury was untypical. It's not like brain injuries that you usually see where one region of the brain is damaged and that region is responsible for example, speech, and that person can't talk anymore. But no, it was more injuries around the entire brain. And like as a kid, I remember back in high school, I was talking to doctors. I was very much involved, in that process. I was trying to see, what was going on in the brain. Like, why isn't that person waking up? Why isn't that person able to communicate anymore? The person has their eyes open, but that's about it. They're just open eyes. And I remember going into the doctor's office, a neurologist at that time. He opened the CT scans and they just scroll through it, and he starts explaining to me, there's black area over here, there's a shadow over there, or there's something going on over here. I'm like, I mean, balls seems to, for me, it's like unknown territory. I don't know what's going on exactly. And then where I used to live at that time, they would give you the CT scan if you would like to keep it or take it to another doctor for a second opinion. So like I remember taking that CD, or which the CT scan back in that day, you give you on a CD, put it in the computer and just for hours. I would just scroll through and just look at the brain, because like the way you do it is you scroll through a mouse and it shows you different axes and the orientations of that scan. I just sit there, spend like 2 hours just going through it. I'm like,
Wow.
what's going on? I don't get it.
Yeah.
I see blackness, and this blackness is resulting in this person not waking up. So that kind of drove me to ask and to be more curious. Why is this happening? What could be done to reverse this, or what could be done to help, overcome this situation? And that all fueled in me the love for research, and specifically the brain research. Because I just wanted to get in there, be able to understand the brain, be able to understand what could go wrong, how the neurons could recover after an injury, how could the brain could recover after an injury, if that is even possible. So all that led me into where I am today, which is stroke research.
Wow.
And I think that injury that happened to the person I've been mentioning is actually a stroke.
Yeah.
So that all kind of puts everything into context, into where I'm trying right now to develop non-invasive techniques to get into those people's brains, to be able to help those people recover after an injury such as stroke, give hope to those people, not let other people experience what I've experienced, where you're seeing some part of your family member laying down there in bed, not knowing not being able to help them.
That's really beautiful. It's clearly a very purposeful journey, and I'm really sorry to hear about your family member, but it clearly fueled a beautiful, beautiful journey. You talked about analyzing CT scans and stuff like that. I know it's kind of off topic with self-improvement, but I'm really interested. How do you even get to a point where you recognize certain nuances into CT scans, and then you can analyze a whole person's brain just through little contrast and light?
There are different kinds of neuroimaging. That's what I would like to call. I mean, CT scan is one of them. There's fMRI, functional magnetic resonance as well. That's another, and there's PET scan. So there's currently also, I don't know if we would call it neuroimaging, but through the use of ultrasound, which is basically waves that go into the brain and reflect back using the Doppler technique. But there's multiple ways of visualizing the brain, specifically speaking, on a computer. Focusing on the CT scan, well, it creates Z planes images of the brain. So it takes specific planes and images them in sections.
Yes.
And the image that you see finally on a computer is basically all of those sections basically placed together. And you can rotate through, or you can scroll through those sections one by one to see how each section of the brain, structurally speaking, is placed. Versus an fMRI, you're not looking anymore at the structure, more you're looking at the function. So those are the differences between an MRI and a CT scan. One looks at the structure of the brain, the other one looks at the function of the brain, so how the brain is functioning. But going back to the CT scan, the contrast that you see in those images, the brain structure can, for instance, show you that for one part of the brain is, for example, damaged, so you won't see a lot of contrast. You see a shadow, or you see some black spot over there. So you'd know that in this location, in this plane, whether it's outside or inside, deep within the brain, depending on the plane you're looking at, it would tell you that there's either water accumulation, blood, for instance, or any sort of fluid, or it would tell you that if there is a tumor, which will look like an object over there in a specific size and orientation, or it will tell you that part of your brain is gone.
Wow.
So there's no tissue. There's brain tissue missing in that part of the region. So that's what a CT scan would most of the time identify or kind of hint at when you were looking at it. But yeah, there's fMRI that could help you know more if that part of the brain is actually functioning.
And there must be like some different pros and cons to each different types of brain scan, I guess.
Definitely, yeah. There's, as I mentioned, one could show you the structure only and not the function. The other could show you it could also reflect a bit of the structure, but
Yeah.
mostly it's for the function, because the fMRI works with the blood and oxygen signals through the brain. So basically, if you're doing an MRI, you're sometimes you're interacting with the radiologist or the tech that is controlling the MRI
Mhm.
machine, and they either, depending on the region of interest of the brain where they're looking at, or they're looking at the entire brain, they make you either read something or they make you look at images, or interact and or create perform an activity,
Yep.
or anything physical that creates activation of the brain. So basically, for instance, if you're interested in speech centers of the brain, they'll give you something to read while you're in the MRI, and as they're imaging, they'll see some sort of, shining light happening, more light focused on the region of
That's
of
crazy.
speech. So we knowing how that works is because when your neurons are working, when your brain is working, it requires blood supply,
Mhm.
and it has a high demand for blood supply
Yeah.
in the brain. So if you start reading something, you start seeing more blood circulation is focused to that region of the brain. So like this function of the brain is actually functional. It's working. That area of the brain is functional.
Mhm.
That's how the MRI would kind of identify the function of the brain
Yeah.
using the blood signal.
Well, that's crazy. That's seriously the fact that like you
Yeah.
can see it in lifetime.
On that,
Uh,
so you said that you can actually see the light on the brains and stuff. So does thinking hard, or does thinking for a while expend energy, like in your body, like calorific potential?
I mean, the brain as an organ, it's a high. It requires high metabolic. It has high metabolic demands. So like, I think it takes about 20% of the blood supply of your body. I'm gonna fact check me on this one actually.
Mhm.
It requires a lot of energy. Definitely, it has high demand for energy. So for sure, yeah. For example, if you if you don't have that energy available somewhere, you won't see neurons functioning as they should be functioning. So,
So
yeah.
so now our viewers that want to get into a bit more of the health field, they know a little bit more about how do you analyze the brain. But I want to know how or what techniques did you develop through your whole parkour through schools to optimize your studying, and how do you get more bang for your bucks? And because you're clearly a knowledgeful guy, like seriously, like you're just spilling knowledge and we're but
I remember all of that too.
yeah, how do you even like how do you first of all you study and you recognize these things, and how do you keep remembering them? I mean, through exposure of course, but did you develop any specific techniques through time or anything particular that might help some of our younger viewers in high school, for example?
I mean, oh, sorry. Definitely. The idea, the main idea that I would like to highlight over the entire process
Mhm.
is having discipline. Is once you have discipline, you can discipline yourself into a routine. You can
Mhm.
discipline yourself into doing something. You set a goal, you achieve that goal. Without discipline, this all could not be achieved, of course. But yeah, I mean, in terms of something we were talking about off camera is
Mhm.
how you go on with your day. How do you set your goals and how do you achieve those goals? So I like to do something called associating cues with the rewards, and those rewards usually enhance the neural response, or harnesses the neuroplasticity response in your brain. For instance, yeah, you wake up in the morning, you take a few minutes to think about the goals of your day, what you want to do, what you're planning on doing. So those are like the cues, the
Mhm.
tasks that you're creating. You create those cues, and then you take a few minutes just to think about it in a positive way. Do you want to what positive things I could get in return from doing those cues and accomplishing those cues.
Yeah.
And of course, the most important part of it here is that you set a reward system, positive feedback, a positive reinforcement system. So by setting a reward system, you're basically saying that if I do those cues, then I'm getting something positive in return.
Mm-hmm.
And those tricks, well, not even tricks, but like those ways of manipulating your brain and how the brain views those goals that you have per day could be beneficial on motivating and potentiating you to actually go on and do those cues, do those goals, get on with your day, do your work, go through school, or do your workout, whatever your goal is.
Of course.
So yeah, setting the cues, creating a reward, rewarding yourself, thinking about it in a positive way. That of course all helps, in completing.
Of course, so creating some like positive feedback loops and stuff like that. So like you mentioned before the podcast, is like eating a piece of your favorite chocolate or something.
Basically,
like
yeah. For example, yeah, I wake up this morning, I say, well, I have to go on and do a workout, and that workout is, I don't know, upper body workout, and then if I do this workout, I'm gonna reward myself with my favorite meal later on. That is in a healthy way, of course.
Of course.
That is not.
You're not trying to go to McDonald's and go all out, right?
Exactly. Like my favorite meal could be something that fits within my
a good steak, for example.
A good steak, for example. Yeah. Like I mean, for the concept behind cheat days. When you're like, oh, I'm gonna work out for 2-3 months, and then I'm gonna reward myself with a cheat day. I've went through that process before. I've gone through a diet plan, and I was like, I'm gonna follow this nutritionist plan. I'm gonna follow a workout routine, and then in 3 months I'm gonna have an open day, a cheat day. Just gonna go on and eat my favorite things.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I'd never had a cheat day, but I kind of associated what I was doing with having that reward at the end, and it pushed me through everything. It kind of helped me go through the 3 months of training, go through the 3 months of dieting, following a strict diet routine. Even though at the end, every time I'm nearing that day of a cheat day, I'm like, oh, I'm dreaming about it. I can't wait until I get there. This is all pushing me forward. And then once I'm near, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna have another 2 months of
screw the cheat day.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep pushing. Exactly. That's the main thing. But like the main idea of here is that you set a goal, and that goal has a reward, and you want to work hard to get to that reward.
So yeah, you could bridge that to studying in some way, for sure.
Exactly. So like for the case of studying, you're like, I want to become an expert in this field. I want to know more about the brain. I want to know more about the kidneys, urinary tract, whatever floats your boat, I guess. I want to know. I want to become an expert in economics. So you set that goal. You work hard. You kind of envision that goal happening. You wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I'm gonna wake up today. I'm gonna achieve this in my day, and this achievement is gonna give me a step forward into going near my goal. A few more days, few more months, years, whatever it takes me, but I'm gonna get through that goal. And trust me, the closer you get to that goal, the sweeter it's gonna feel. The better it's gonna feel. It's gonna push you forward more. It's gonna give you that motivation, and once you achieve it, you're gonna get used to being motivated.
It's gonna become a habit.
Goal driven. Exactly. That goal driven attitude is what creates success, creates people achieving their goals, creates happiness in life. Is being goal oriented, goal driven, and have the focus on discipline.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful.
You're also referencing when you're talking about rewarding yourself after your cues at the end of the day, eating a piece of chocolate. It's kind of like micro wins. So let's say in personal training, if you celebrate only once they've lost 20 pounds, the celebration will take a long time and they might drop out before those 20 pounds. If you celebrate at every pound lost, then the prospect is usually going to finish the actual whole workout plan, all the months of working out. So it's kind of the same thing as what you referenced. It's like micro wins. So for you, let's say, you wake up in the morning, you tell yourself, okay, today I'm going to do this one surgery, I'm going to do this one study, and then you reward yourself with a steak. So this is how you go out throughout your day. What does a day actually look like for a PhD candidate like yourself? What does it look like from morning to end of day? I know you have a very busy schedule. Yeah. What is actually going on?
Oh gosh, I have to go through my calendar for that.
Okay. Google Calendar.
Hey, what's up? Quick intermission here. Hope you guys are enjoying this episode. Hope you guys are getting great value. Make sure you leave a like. Make sure you subscribe. The usual. Feed the algorithm. Go follow us on social media and keep enjoying this episode.
So yeah, I'll wake up usually around like 6:30 to. Yeah, I wouldn't want to say later because that pushes my day a bit forward. But yeah, I wake up at 6:30. I get ready for work. I have my morning coffee. I'm a big coffee fan, by the way. Espresso all the way.
Good stuff,
That's
man.
we can create a whole podcast on espresso.
Yeah, of course, of course. Let's get into coffee, guy.
Right there.
Exactly. It's most important part of my day. Always have my coffee.
Of
and
course.
Get that caffeine into my system, and then I drive to the hospital. It's about like 30 to 40 minutes drive with the traffic. I arrive at the general hospital next to the which has a campus, which actually University of Ottawa has a campus on the general hospital, and that's where I study and then do my research and my work at the Faculty of Medicine over there. Usually, I either have my surgery scheduled for the day. If I have a surgery, that basically takes the entire day. Usually, when I have a surgery, it starts at 8, ends around 4:30 to 5. And if not, I don't have a surgery. Usually, I have experiments. So
Okay.
those experiments would look also kind of fill up my entire schedule. So if I have experiments also that usually ends around like 5 or 6 or even 7. Depends on how long the procedures are. It depends if there is different drugs to test in those experiments. If I don't have either experiments or surgeries, we'd be talking about writing or meetings. So that also takes up part of my day. So I usually, when I don't have experiments, I don't have surgeries, I like to divide my day where I do, for instance, a few hours of writing, and then if I have a meeting, I go to that meeting. Usually, most of the days at the hospital, we have talks, stimulating talks from colleagues and then visitors from around North America or the world, neuroscientists that like to come in and give their inputs on recent research. So I love attending those. It's very educational for me and for everyone over there as well. So those things, kind of fill up my entire day. And then I come back home. That's my usual routine. I see you guys at the gym sometimes.
Of course, we're always there.
I've been skipping a few days now, a few weeks, but I'm trying
You
to
gotta
get
come
back.
see us, man.
I have to get back to my gym routine. It helps. It reveals a lot of the stress that you have throughout the day. The pain of sitting down sometimes when you have to write in the meeting. So, I'm sorry.
How long are your surgeries usually?
I would say it depends on the number of animals that I'm performing the surgeries on, but that goes from between 6 to 7 hours.
Oh wow!
Oh,
Just
wow.
sat there.
We most of the time I'm sitting there in surgery, yes, because we do microsurgery, and microsurgery involves using a surgical microscope, and a surgical microscope you don't want to stand and look through the surgical microscope. You have to be sitting. And the way you have to position yourself and the way you have to be close to the table, that puts a lot of strain on your neck and your hands. So you just imagine yourself sitting there for 6-7 hours. Going back home.
You're going to get a Mike Tyson neck at the end.
Exactly.
Like,
going back home, getting that workout done, that relieves a lot.
It really helps.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
good. You were talking about how you like your coffee in the morning, and it got me thinking. Of course, we've seen some neuroscientists online. Well, I've seen personally Dr. Huberman. A lot of our audience knows him. He was talking about nicotine and how if you remove the smoking aspect of it, it becomes less harmful to consume it. So I was wondering if, like nicotine, for example, and if you don't really want to get into it, that's completely fine. But is nicotine becoming a better option now that there are way more options, for example, like nicotine gums, Zen pouches, which are getting really popular now in Europe and coming now to Canada? Is it safer to consume nicotine if you remove the smoking aspect of it?
It's an interesting input on nicotine. I mean, I haven't heard Huberman's opinion on it. But my general take on nicotine is, or smoking in general, it's harmful. Don't do it. But I mean, any foreign substance, generally speaking, whether it's nicotine, whether it's cannabis or whatever it is, any foreign substance that creates a different experience in your brain, that goes into your brain, and then it creates a system of a circuitry or a system in the brain to activate either more or less. Is not good for the brain.
Okay.
It wouldn't, I mean, speaking recreationally, of course, not in terms of disease. So not in terms of like depression or any sort of...
Is there a medical uses to nicotine?
I can't recall any medical use for nicotine. But for instance, cannabis, there has been a lot of research and medical use on cannabis and how medically relevant it is for treatments or management of pain and things like that. But speaking of recreational use of any foreign substance, in my opinion, I think it's not good for the brain.
Yeah.
Speaking about nicotine specific, I mean, what does nicotine do? It goes into the brain. It creates stimulation, it's stimulant. There's little nicotinic receptors in your neurons that respond to those nicotine signals. So the nicotine goes in, it binds to those nicotinic receptors, it increases the firing of those neurons. So you're stimulating the neurons. And the smoker in general, or a nicotine user in general, undergoes something called self-curing. So you're curing yourself by taking more nicotine, more cigarettes. And the reason is because, like, once you go through your cigarette, okay, as a chronic smoker speaking, so you light up a cigarette, you're ingesting that nicotine, getting it through the brain, into the brain. What happens in the neurons when those nicotinic receptors are there, there's a lot of nicotine available in the space, in the neuron, around the neurons. So in response, the neurons produce more nicotinic receptors. So there's more receptors available on the neuron for more nicotine. So because the brain wants to receive all the nicotine, it doesn't want to skip out on any of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So now what happens is that you finish a cigarette, you throw it out, and you're like, I want another one. And that's how addiction starts with nicotine, right?
Of course.
It's because, like, there's a lot of nicotine receptors sitting on the neurons. There's abundance of them, and since there's a lot, it kind of signals for wanting more nicotine. So that's like, sure, yeah, you can call it that way. And then you light up another cigarette, and then you start self-curing that craving.
Is it similar to caffeine, or is well, I know nicotine's really highly addictive. Is it similar to caffeine? Does the preparation?
So I haven't seen anyone rob a bank, for instance, to get caffeine. So I wouldn't call caffeine addictive.
Okay.
I know there's a general concept about or some views on how people are addicted to coffee, and they wouldn't, if they don't have their coffee, they're in a bad mood. I mean, it's very much subjective on how you perceive bad mood and coffee.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can get addicted to caffeine, I would say. Yeah, I mean, you, as I told you wouldn't go and rob a bank or kill someone just to get coffee and beans, But the way that coffee works is it temporarily blocks the feeling of tiredness in the brain. So coffee works on adenosine receptors in the brain. Also works on other serotonin systems as well. But generally speaking, caffeine molecule itself looks like adenosine. So it's similar molecular shape. So adenosine usually signals go through the body into the brain, signaling to the brain that we're low in adenosine. It's time to relax. Let us produce more adenosine. Let us produce more energy. So the brain goes into saying that, oh, you know what? It's time to sleep. So you get tired, and then you drink coffee. Suddenly you're not tired anymore. I mean, it's not because you're getting energy or anything. You're just what happens is that caffeine molecule goes into the brain. And since it looks like this adenosine receptor, adenosine ligand, the molecule, it sits in the receptor of adenosine. So when it sits in the adenosine receptor, it blocks adenosine from binding. So now adenosine could not go into the brain and signal that the body is tired. So like you're transiently or temporarily blocking the ability of your brain of sensing that the body is tired and the body needs to relax. So essentially you're kind of shutting down that tired feeling, but you're not stimulating the brain. You're not. I mean, also caffeine works on other systems like serotonin, as I said. It could be stimulatory in that sense.
Yeah.
But you're not. Like drinking coffee is not an energy source. I would say. It's not like an energy drink.
Yeah, of course, no.
Is that why it's not addictive? But then you will get addicted to it due to habit?
It's more habit creating a habit of associating morning routine with a coffee
and stuff like that.
I mean, other than that, it tastes good.
Yeah, of course, we love coffee. We love coffee. The reason why I was asking this is because there's similar effects to caffeine and nicotine, like an increase in alertness and perhaps cognitive function. But I guess the differentiating part here is the dopaminergic response to nicotine. That's pretty much which is different from coffee.
Dopaminergic response to nicotine is Well, yeah, I mean, it's more like self pleasure. You know,
Yeah.
you're getting that reward,
Mm-hmm.
which is a cigarette or the nicotine or whatever you name it, or whatever the way you ingest it, and that thing is it rewards. It kind of creates that reward in your brain. The reward is associated with dopamine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even like going on and achieving any other goal in your day creates dopamine release in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting that reward. So I don't know if that basically answers your question of that.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get
Yeah.
it.
But like generally speaking, my take on nicotine, just to go over that, the main question is, I wouldn't per se encourage it.
No, of course, no way. We're not encouraging smoking here. I was just wondering because now, because smoking is that's the killer. Like you never want to breathe fire. Like that's never an option you want to do. And I was wondering if there's safer way to consume it, for, like Zen pouches, like I mentioned, where it's just a pouch that sits on your nasal lining. I was wondering if maybe it's a viable option now for people. Yeah, for people who are looking for higher alertness, higher cognitive function, would that be a considerable option?
A thing about like when we say smoking, nicotine patches.
Mm-hmm.
A person who never smoked a cigarette in their day, they're not gonna go and put a nicotine patch and be like,
No,
consume
yeah, of course
nicotine. I mean, a lot of those nicotine patches are prescribed by doctors or recommended by doctors actually for the use for the chronic smokers who
Mhm.
are looking on to quit smoking,
Yeah.
stop the use of cigarettes or any other products that contain nicotine.
Well, yeah, like
nicotine
nicotine
gum,
gum,
for
for example,
example.
which they're just over the counter. You
Exactly,
just go
exactly.
to the pharmacy and just
I
get
said
some.
like either you have a discussion with your doctor or your pharmacist about those things,
Mhm.
and they would either recommend it or recommend different solutions.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. So those patches usually, from my limited knowledge about them, I'm not an expert in that area, but I know they deliver a certain amount of nicotine in milligrams,
Mm-hmm.
and it says that this nicotine helps replenish or kind of feed the will or the wanting of nicotine.
The craving,
The craving, yeah, that's a better word to use. Craving, the craving of nicotine. So perhaps this could be a good temporary solution if you're craving nicotine and you want to skip the part where you're ingesting it through inhaling burnt substances,
Mhm.
which could be damaging to other organs
Yeah, exactly.
in the body. But let's not forget a very important factor about smoking. Forget the nicotine and forget the burning, but speaking about how the brain views this is the habit of holding a cigarette in your hand
The
and then
habit.
having it in your
The
mouth.
environment, stuff
Having it
like
in
that.
your mouth
Yeah.
itself, that feeling on your lips, the feeling that you have something in your hand, right? The feeling that you have to go out to smoke and stand usually with a group of people, or
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
smoking while watching a TV show. This creates a habit, and sometimes this habit is associated with the reward, and that reward is basically that allows the dopaminergic system to kick in and go, and that's how the brain is associating this habit with reward, which is picking up a cigarette, lighting it up,
Mm-hmm.
and sitting or talking to someone or performing something, whatever it is. So it's most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting over that habit is what stops people from stopping.
That's the killer,
So
right?
most of the time, it's like, yeah, you're getting
Mhm.
like, I know a lot of people. I've seen some men and women over there. They sometimes light the cigarette, and they forget it's actually lit. They don't smoke it. They just leave it in their hands. It's the habit, right? It's the
Mhm.
habit of doing that, and that habit is associated with this reward. But every time you do this habit again, every time you do this action again, you get that reward in your brain. I mean, that kind of also touches on your previous question as well. So how is that associated with the reward? So smoking comes in like multiple parts. It's not only the part where we're ingesting nicotine, and nicotine is chemically changing the signaling in our brain, but also the habit of using the cigarette and lighting the cigarette and associating with events throughout
Mhm.
the day. And that all creates the phenomena of addiction in smoking.
So as we touched on earlier, like right now you just gave us a bunch of information that you memorize and that you know that you learn. So what do you recommend as the best method of learning? How do you learn? How do you verify your sources? And how do you actually remember all this stuff?
Uh, so that's a tough one. I mean, as we're generally speaking, as we grow and as we learn and as we read more, our brains form those long-term memories. The brain works on associating the memories with events. For instance, I come in right now and we're talking about the brain right now over a cup of coffee and this house. So I come back the next day over here and I see the cup of coffee and I see this house and I'm like, oh, I kind of recall everything that happened over here. Perhaps not in precise details, but since this event has a meaning to me, it holds something positive in my mind. It created a good impact on me. So speaking in a very simplified way, the hippocampus over there, which is the region of the brain that is responsible for creating memories, kicks in and creates this memory. And this memory is created in a sort of a long-term memory. It sits there for a while. So later on, when I come back, my brain as a system, my eyes views the place, and then as the signal goes through my eyes, goes to the ophthalmic nerve down to the occipital lobe, and then travels to the other circuitry into the brain, initiating different parts of the brain, activating different parts of the brain where the hippocampus is able to communicate to those parts of the brain, where it kind of kicks in the memory based on visual experience, based on physical experience, based on different kinds of stimulation that are around me in my environment. And that when that is kicked in, I recall that memory, or you or anyone else. And that's how, generally speaking, in a simplified way, the brain would work by associating things around it. So in terms of like how do I remember all the information when I study, as I said, if you're passionate about something, if you're doing something that you like, again, or if you're doing something you don't like, also. For example, if you had a bad experience, you would also be able to remember that bad experience. I mean,
do you want me to shut the door?
Yeah, sure, we'll close it.
I mean, speaking for a very known disorder, which is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, which a lot of our veterans or people who were involved in traumatic distress situations undergo, which is associating something negative with a response in you. So like, you've been in war, you come back, you hear fireworks, and the sound of the fireworks creates a recalling of memory, of bad memories that you have seen in that bad situation of like explosions or whatever it is. So that's how the brain also associates something negative, and in response, it creates the recall of memories. So similar things. If I'm doing something that I enjoy as well, something positive, like learning neuroscience or learning about the brain or reading a research article or whatever it is, that helps me create that long-term memory, and that long-term memory gets in use when needed. For example, when we're having today's discussion, I can get to recall the things that I learned, the things I associated positively because I created those long-term memories. Since I'm doing something positive, I like it. I enjoy doing that thing. Hopefully nothing negative comes out.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So basically, in a simplified manner, that's how I try to learn things. I try to remember things. I mean, there are other tricks, if you want to really touch on them as well. There are other tricks of associating things with cues. So like creating memory. There's something I learned in psychology during my undergraduate studies a while ago. Is a memory palace, or how you create different rooms in your brain, and creating in that memory palace where you create each room is associated with something, and then you go in and you navigate through that palace. I mean, probably I have colleagues in psychology who would know more about this phenomena.
Yeah.
But also there's something else, like associating things with memories, like objects. Like right now I'm walking through a hike, and I see a tree, or I see a tree with a specific logo, a specific thing on it, or a branch that looks wrong, or I don't know, some marks on the tree, and I associate that tree with something weird on it or something unique on it, has next to it a person or an animal or whatever. So when I come back again to this area, I go like, oh, because of seeing that tree, this kind of helps me recall that there was someone.
There might
Oh,
be
yeah.
an animal.
So associate, exactly. We're associating those cues, objects, with memories. So that's another way of, of handling
You
this.
you touched on PTSD a little earlier, and I was wondering if you're having a CT scan, do you think post-traumatic stress has an impact on the structural integrity of the brain?
That's a very, very important question. And the short answer to this question is I don't know. I don't know if there's research that have been done on the structure of the brain due to PTSD. What I know is maybe there could be changes functionally in the wiring, the connectivity of the brain, and the way that the brain is associating memories with fear or events, fearful, dangerous events, or whatever kind of event. Someone singing "Happy Birthday" and you're frightened from that Happy Birthday song. Perhaps there could be functional changes, but I'm not sure if those functional changes are associated with structural
Yeah, so you
changes.
couldn't really see it on the CT scan.
If I were to guess, I would say no. You would not be able to see
Okay.
it.
I was wondering because I mean it can change so much of a person's behavior. So I was wondering, like you said, it might like change some maybe neurological pathways. But I was really wondering if you might be able to visualize that in some way. Well, I guess not. But like in terms of PTSD, is there ways to like clinically fix it other than therapy? It's really, it's purely hypothetical out here, but I'm wondering, like, because I know a lot of people who suffer from PTSD for X, Y, and Z reason, and I was wondering if there might be some clinical way to fix it, like for some drug, for example. Yeah.
I mean, there are drugs that work on patients with PTSD. I'm not an MD, so I wouldn't go into like the actual classes of drugs that could work with people with PTSD, and I'm not really an expert on PTSD, but I do know that there are some drugs that people use for those things. And please correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone knows more about it. But also I've been recently reading about different disorders and how those disorders could be treated with magnetic stimulation, for instance.
Oh.
So that's another form of transcranial magnetic stimulation. So we have something called TMS.
Okay.
So TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation, and and it's currently TMS is an FDA approved therapy, where it was first developed for treatments of depression, for example.
Okay.
Where the way this works is that you bring a big magnet, not at home.
No,
You go to a
don't do this at
clinic.
home, guys.
You
Do not try this
Yeah,
at
no,
home.
you won't even. The machine is quite expensive. You can't even get at home. It's
Yeah.
like it's a magnet. The main idea behind it's a magnet. You go to a clinic, and then you place that magnet over your head, and that magnet creates signals, the magnetic stimulation signals, and those magnetic waves, frequencies, magnetic stimulation goes through the skull intracranially into the brain tissue, and creates a change in the magnetic field and change in the electrical field around the neuron. And the change in electrical field using the magnets creates what do you call it? In a simple way, a change in the membrane potential of the neuron, allowing the neuron to fire more. So either allowing it to fire more, or it can also allow it to fire less. So
Okay.
we could manipulate it based on the frequency of the stimulation, based on how much stimulation we're giving, at what power, at what frequency, at what location in the brain. So all that also plays a role if we want to make the neurons work more or work less. So it's using that we can manipulate the brain from outside without having to go through the brain, and without having
That
actually
is crazy to me.
yeah,
The fact
without
that you
having
can
to
hack a
drugs.
brain like that is.
So
It's
it's in the
crazy.
clinic. We have one at the Royal Mental Institute. I actually work with a colleague of mine, Dr. Sarah Tremblay, who has a big clinical research right now going on
Okay.
TMS, and she's currently working on mapping the motor cortex and like knowing what each region of the motor cortex, how it works, and just mapping it in general using that magnetic stimulation. So you stimulate that region of the brain, you you get a signal, and that signal is usually either recorded using an EEG or electroencephalogram, which is recording squiggly lines that happen in the brain. Those squiggly lines you see at the doctor's office. Yeah, those are EEG. That's brain waves, brain activation. So each wave frequency signals for a certain activity in the brain, or it also could be recorded in forms of EMG, which is electromyography, which is basically activation of like the electrical activity in the muscles. So it actually also depends on where in the brain you're stimulating.
And how does that work? Because I've seen some research on like muscle stimulation on certain exercise. How does that work? How do you analyze the stimulation of a muscle?
So as I said, there's the device called EMG, which records basically electrical activity happening inside the muscle.
Okay.
So the change in electrical activity, basically, either positive way or negative way, meaning that more electrical activity or less electrical activity can tell us whether this muscle is receiving the signal.
Mm-hmm.
Is it working? Is it contracting? Is it abducting? What do you call it? Contracting. So adduction and abduction, those are the right words, sorry. Those signals that we get from the electrical activity that happens inside the muscle, whether it's that lower body or upper body, can tell if how the health of that muscle, the activation of that muscle. That's one way of looking in if the muscle is working or not.
Oh, okay. So would you say like a research that suggests a higher level of electrical frequency in a muscle means that an exercise is, let's say, more optimal than another one?
Depends on where you're looking at, right? Not every time higher levels is a good thing, right?
Okay.
So, for instance, if you're so those like higher levels of electrical activity that you see, for instance, during exercise. If you right now connect your bicep to an EMG and you start doing some bicep curls, right? You might see more conduction happening in there, higher level electrical activity occurring in the bicep. But once you stop the workout, it's gonna go down back to normal.
Okay.
So like not necessarily that you're able to see that electrical activity happening for long term. And if you actually see it happening for long term, I don't think that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Your biceps constantly.
Yeah. So like I don't think that's a good sign.
You're battery powered at this.
Exactly. So I think you see transient events, like temporary events of increases in electrical activity based on the tasks that you're doing, right? And you want that electrical activity to go back to normal.
Okay.
You don't want it to continually be
the essential is to go back to normal.
Exactly. I mean, you want it to increase during the exercise, for instance. You want to know that your muscle is working, it's responding very well, there's no pain, nothing going on. And for sure, that's why we always have to measure baseline. For sure, perhaps if you measure it today and then a year from now you measure the same muscle again, you see there is higher baseline, meaning the muscle activity that is preceding the exercise. If you compare baseline to baseline from today versus from a year to today, for example, and you see that there's an improvement baseline, that's when you know that there's an actual improvement in the muscle. It's like knowing how the baseline or what the baseline was and compare the baseline, not comparing per se during the exercise, because that's transient events only.
You're talking about all this and the nervous system and the electricity going to people's body, and it got me to wonder why in our public school education do we not discuss the human body in general more? Because we talk a lot about general science, basic chemistry, basic physics. We talk a lot about those, but we rarely touch on human anatomy. Is it because it's too complex for in our stage of learning to comprehend, or is it because it's a field that's that has so much evolution through time that if we educate everyone about this specific thing, the return on investment for the school system is not that high? Yeah, I was wondering. So, do you think it's because it's too complex for people to understand, or maybe we don't need to learn that much about the human body in our public school system?
Actually, those are perfect points that you're bringing up right there. But in my opinion, the things like we learn through the education system right now, which is, as you've touched on, chemistry, physics, math, or whatever it is, those are the basic fundamentals of understanding the next level, which is the human body or the anatomy. I mean, in our body, there's a lot of chemical reactions going on, millions of chemical reactions that goes on throughout your day, and having the ability to conceptualize and understand those chemical reactions, and before you actually dive deeper into where they occur,
What
in the
is a
body,
chemical reaction?
So like I
You
think
just
that's
start with that.
quite important. I mean
Okay.
the physics you have to understand how the body is oriented in space, how it moves, how it reacts to certain things. So understanding the fundamentals of physics and chemistry, and having the ability to do the math, basic needs, is all that is required for you to be able to actually understand. When you look at an organ, what does that organ do? What kind of reactions happen to that organ, and what responses to those reactions occur in that organ? Like liver enzymes, how they're increasing, how they're decreasing. Is that a good or a bad thing? Being suspended and free in the air, physics. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for the body? You had to know the basics of that, and then you want to dive in deeper and be like, okay, so now I understand this basic level, and basic level of understanding of things that might affect the body. And now, if I want to proceed on and learn more about the body and specialize in certain things in my university education, now I have the knowledge that qualifies me to go in deeper and understand now what the liver does. What are the negative outcomes of doing this to the liver, or what happens to the brain if there is no enough food in the body. Those things are chemical reactions, physics behind it. You have to have that basic understanding.
Okay, I understand that.
Just right now, you've touched a little bit on food. Yeah. So throughout everything,
I'm really hungry.
Yeah.
Same here.
Soon.
Throughout everything you've learned in your 10 years of schooling, and even prior to that, what are the biggest changes you've given to your diet? And like you just said, you need to feed your brain. What did you actually change in your diet to feed your brain properly for focus, for brain health, those types of things?
Right. I mean, generally speaking, those diet is quite crucial for your brain, because what you eat impacts a lot how your brain functions, how your body functions. So the things like that has trans fats or high cholesterol food or junk food in general, that is by when we say junk in terms of not healthy, or creates highly processed foods, that creates a bad impact. So like for instance, eating highly processed food high on cholesterol, creates puts you at a higher risk, for example, for developing strokes. Having those arteries in your body get blocked by little fat molecules that build up around or inside the artery, that could promote an episode of stroke, which is quite bad for the brain, I guess.
For sure.
Those kind of things, puts you at higher risk also for not only for injuries such as stroke, but also for neurodegeneration. So, for example, there have been recent research studying the gut axis, the brain and gut axis, how taking care of your gut health affects how your brain functions. So basically the microbiome that you have in your gut, and the microbiome in your gut is managed by the food that you take, right? So that probiotics, for example, or certain types of food that are required for the gut health, or any kind of food that you ingest in your day that could either be harmful to you or could be useful to you. That also affects how your brain is taking that. Because again, let's just not forget that the brain has a high metabolic need for blood, right? And blood carries the nutrients that you take from the food as well, like the sugar, right? So the sugar or the blood that gets supplied to the brain comes from the type of food that you eat. So it's very much affected from the food. So if you're eating fatty food, you're as again going back to the stroke example, you're increasing the plaque accumulation, and that plaque is carried around to the brain, using the blood and probably depositing over there. Maybe you won't see a direct effect. Maybe that plaque is not enough to cause a stroke right on the spot, but it can accumulate. Perhaps something else that could accumulate, leading to another neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or any sort of dementia, through the accumulation of different things that are different plaques that are carried from your blood stream to your brain that deposits over there and over time builds on, causing either vascular dementia form or causing a stroke or any other form of injury. So yeah, adjusting or maintaining what you eat is quite important for how your brain works. And the way I did it is, as I said earlier, I kind of stay away from all those highly processed foods. I try to limit the intake of alcohol, for instance. Although there's been a lot of controversy out there, not controversy actually, there's a lot of research that a few years ago that came out. They're saying, oh yeah, glass of wine every day. I think the average was like 3 glasses for men and 2 glasses for women.
Yeah, I've seen something about that. I've also seen the Canadian government saying that 1 to 2 drinks a week is actually not that
right.
bad or
Yeah,
something like that.
So like, there's a lot of research that came out saying that alcohol is good. You know, it's not necessarily bad. Sure, maybe. Sure, maybe, yeah. But again, there are also research that came out saying that, alcohol is bad in all forms. You shouldn't be ingesting alcohol. So there's, in my opinion, my own personal take at this, I mean, it's your body, your choice at the end of the day, right?
For sure.
Also, like, you don't want to go out and say, well, I'm not going to do this because it's bad for me. But at the end of the day, you also have reward systems. You also have happiness. You want to be happy at some point, right? So like maybe having a glass of wine can make you happy for sure, and then do it. But in my own personal opinion, moderation is the key. So
Of
like
course.
you don't want to go and have a wild party and drink till you get drunk, and then you won't be able to walk or see properly. You moderate. If you do everything in moderation, it wouldn't be as bad as doing it excessively.
Yeah, it's like you reward yourself with a little piece of chocolate.
If you really want to have a pizza, sure, go have a pizza, but you don't have to overeat pizza.
And what's the point of being blackout drunk if you won't remember the night?
Exactly. I mean, that's another point. Is that you want to enjoy your night, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's another point. So yeah, the key to those things, the key to, in my opinion, to those enjoying the things like alcohol or something, it's moderation. Take it in moderation, and I think that wouldn't be wouldn't be bad.
Cholesterol.
Yeah.
I know there's different types of cholesterol, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
What about the ones found in eggs? Because I'm a huge egg fan.
Oh yeah, I love eggs, man. Seriously, I eat
4 every day.
I eat 4 a day.
Am I
Yeah.
at risk for a stroke?
I mean, really, to know more if you're at risk of a stroke or not, you would want to go see your doctor. You would want to do a something called a complete blood count or a CBC, where they measure the levels of triglycerides, they measure the levels of low LDL and LDL and HDL, which is the low and the high lipolipids. Like so basically, generally speaking, what is known out there is like if you have a lot of LDL, it creates cholesterol and gives you that disease. And if and you want to have more of the HDL, and then I mean going further into why LDL is bad for you is because it's actually those lipids, the LDL, they're smaller in size than the HDLs, and the risk of them actually leaving the blood vessels and being deposited elsewhere around the arteries is higher. So having more of them creates more risk for them being deposited around, creating plaques around the body, and that creates a stroke essentially. Speaking about eggs, I mean, if your body is okay with 4 eggs, then it's okay with 4 eggs. I mean, of course, don't go crazy and have like
30 eggs in a day.
Be moderate.
I wish I could.
Have things in moderation. Eggs are nice, but again, if you're really curious about if that's a good or a bad thing, I would highly suggest that you go speak to your pharmacist or to your doctor.
Yeah.
Get some blood work done. Tell them why you're concerned about it. I'm pretty sure they would tell.
Would you say that having like a recurring blood work done is a good habit to have? So like, let's say you go every 6 months, you go get your blood work done. Do you think that's a good habit for people to have a photographic like I would say portrait of their general health? Exactly. Because I think I'm a healthy guy, but I might be deficient in X, Y, and Z. So do you recommend going to get a few blood tests a few times a year?
Again, that in my own personal opinion, I think it creates more paranoia than anything.
Okay.
But it depends on your needs, right? So if you go to your doctor or pharmacy and you talk about that I have X, Y, and Z, conditions, they might require that, yeah, you have to come and perform blood tests regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you go and you talk about your conditions and you just want to make sure you've never had a blood work done to you before in like 5-10 years or something, and you just want to do it, and then they do that test for you and they find nothing is wrong with you, or all levels are of things in the blood are normal, they would not recommend that you come and do it again, because continuously going and like checking those things, if you're a healthy individual who do not need it, you're not sick, you don't have a disorder or disease that requires you to do it, creates nothing but paranoia. You're like paranoid that, oh yeah, I have to now go and check my blood every 6 months just to make sure there's nothing wrong, and this creates a bad habit, generally speaking. So in my opinion, if you don't need it, don't do it.
Okay.
Do it if you only need it. Doing it just for the fun of it, or just to make sure, without having solid evidence behind it. If your doctor doesn't agree with it or doesn't recommend it, I don't think it's something necessary to do every single.
And since we're talking about blood tests here, I was wondering, since you're a neurosurgeon, you might know. Not a neuroscientist. Soon. When bodybuilders, for example, take exogenous hormones, how does that affect the brain, and does that lead to neurodegeneration?
Exogenous hormones.
So, like, let's say for people who are like bodybuilders who take testosterone to get bigger gains, or for people who are transitioning genders, for example. Let's not get into politics, but just what's the effect on the brain in the long term or the short term too?
I'm not really an expert in that field.
Okay.
Like I don't know much about that topic, but I mean, generally speaking, just like what I've said earlier, ingesting any substance for object like exogenous hormones therapy or things like that, they for sure will create a change in the way your brain works and the way how your brain functions. But again, I wouldn't be able to go to the details of it because I really don't know much about it. But that's an interesting question.
I guess we need to look it up.
You should look it up for sure.
Yeah. So do you have any other questions?
Of course. Oh. So you talked about your studies, and how long are these studies to actually become a PhD, a doctor, a neuroscientist?
Right. Oh, that's brings back a lot of memories. So so you have to go through your basic high schooling. Get your. I mean, it depends if you're Quebec or you're Ontario. It's different. If you go to Cégep in Quebec, there's no Cégep in Ontario. There's high school. Personally, I haven't been to Cégep. I've done my schooling outside of this country even, so I have a high school degree. So you get the high school degree that qualifies you to get into university. Well, as an undergraduate student in university, you go through 4 years of undergraduate bachelor degree, and that degree could be in anything. I mean, if you're really focused on becoming a neuroscientist, the recommendation is that your undergraduate degree is in science or something related to science, any field of science, like biology, chemistry, whatever really makes you enjoy science. Well, my undergraduate degree was in translational and molecular medicine. It's a mouthful of things. So my undergraduate degree, as I've mentioned earlier, it's mostly focused on viruses and bacteria, and kind of also we looked into bacteria or viruses that eats bacteria. They're called bacteriophages. And if you actually Google my name and they write bacteriophage, you'll find a bacteriophage that I actually archived. I found here in Gatineau Park, and I archived in the international bacteriophage library in Pittsburgh, USA, and that is a Canadian bacteriophage found in Gatineau Park in Quebec, made in Quebec. Well, I discovered that bacteriophage. I collected the sample, the soil sample. I analyzed it, purified it, and extracted the DNA, and then sent it out.
Listen, Gatineau has great wonders here for sure. Viruses, hold on.
Viruses. So, like for instance, that was my undergraduate background, which is studying TMM and getting involved in the research in terms of viruses and bacteriology.
How old are you during those? Is it 4 years?
It's a 4 years degree, yeah.
What age?
Well, it's a bit of a up and down journey for me. It's a little non-traditional. So generally speaking, I think the person would finish high school around the age of 19, 18 to 19,
Mm-hmm.
and then get into university around the ages of 20 to 24, 23 to 24, depends on when you start university. That's the traditional path, right? And then right after doing all that, you have to go into graduate studies. If you're actually pursuing a PhD in a specific field like neuroscience, for example, you'd want to get into graduate studies. So graduate studies, like what I did, was a master's degree in neuroscience. So in order to do a master's degree, you have to have your undergraduate degree, your bachelor's degree. You qualify for a master's degree, you apply for it. The way you do it, you could either do it a thesis-based master's or a course-based master's. So meaning that you don't do research. So a thesis-based master's is that a master's that is involved in research, hands-on research. A course-based master's is a master's that is involved in coursework. So you go to class, you take courses, and that's about it. But I believe that if you want to go into a PhD in neuroscience, it's always preferable that if you do a thesis-based master. So you do research, and at the end of your research, which is about 2 years for a master's degree, you end up writing a thesis. So that thesis basically encapsulates everything that you have done, all the findings you have done in your master's, and you submit that thesis, and that's how you earn your master's degree. That's what I basically did. So basically, then right after, you apply for a doctorate degree in neuroscience or whatever field you like, and that usually lasts about 4 to 5 years, I would say. Depends on the pace of the research, depends on the area of the research, and depends on multiple factors. So again, the PhD, I don't think there is a course-based PhD. It's always a thesis-based PhD. So you have to write a thesis again at the end of your PhD, which is much larger than a master's thesis. And that thesis usually comes along multiple publications. So as a PhD candidate, you also have to contribute to the scientific field. You know, there's a lot of universities out there that says you're not able to graduate with a PhD degree unless you've contributed to the society with something with something positive. You know, negative or positive, because negative findings are also important for the field to know what things work and what things do not work. But yeah, you have it's publishing is sometimes recommended, sometimes needed for you to get a PhD. Sometimes it's not. In my case, it's not. It's not something crucial, but we're in the process currently right now. I'm actually in the process of writing my first paper.
It's coming out soon,
gonna
be cool.
It's gonna be
What's the process of releasing a paper?
So a paper,
because like, listen, in our physics class, like, we do like a lab, we do some experiment, then we have to elaborate on it on a document after. So like, how does that go for you? Like, where do you start? Like, with an idea, first of all, like, oh, I should analyze this, and then make something about that. Like, what's the whole process? Well, I'm sure it's a long process, but in simple terms, what's the process of releasing a research?
I mean, there are multiple different kinds of papers. So there's not only there's different forms of it. So the article, there's a review paper, and there's a methods paper, there is a commentary paper. But each type of paper really has a different story to tell. For example, a research article, a main article, is telling about novel findings in research. You're finding new things, you're discovering new things, and you're publishing it out there. You're putting it out there for the audience to read. For either you're targeting general audience, everyone in the field, everyone around you, or you're targeting specific scientific audience, and that usually entails on how you write that paper. So based on the paper you're writing, it depends. It kind of has, or it kind of implements on what you should be doing before. So for example, a research article, which is what I'm currently doing, which is publishing novel findings. So that usually involves research before it. So you have to actually do research, find a topic of interest that you're interested in, do the research about it, find data, find evidence, collect evidence. So you go through the scientific methods of observation, creating a hypothesis. You know, once you create the hypothesis, you test the hypothesis using experiments, whether they're hands-on experiments, whether they're theoretical experiments, could be different kinds of experiments. And then you have to do some statistics on those experiments and see what are the chances that those, or what is the probability that those results that you're seeing in front of you are not due to chance. So once you get that figured out, then you're like, okay, so everything that I'm seeing over here, if it's repeated, is probably going to happen again. And that's how we know something is significant in the science field. It's not saying like saying that there is less than 5% chance that what I'm seeing in front of me is due to chance. So that's kind of complicated a bit. So like you're saying that this, if I repeat this right now again, this will happen again. The same phenomenon will happen. So once you do that, once you do your statistics, you figure out everything you're looking at is actually significant. It's actually useful. It's like it happens. So you go on and you start writing your paper. You're like, okay, so those are my findings. This is the methods that I've used. So when you write a paper, you have to give it a background first, and you have to tell the audience based on who you're targeting. What is the motive for this research? What was the background for this research? The methods you have used. And when you're writing the methods, you have to go in details for allowing someone to replicate that research if they wanted to do it again and verify the results. And then you start writing the results, the findings. I found blah, blah, increases something, for example. And then you have to discuss those results at the end. Like give a brief discussion on your opinion, why those results are important, why this research is important, kind of try to tie in everything together. And you submit this to a journal. Now in the journal, and that's the beautiful part about it, and it hasn't been done for a long period of time actually, which is peer review. So every article that is submitted to a journal gets peer reviewed by either 2 to 4 scientists, people who are experts in the field. So they take your paper. If most of the journals sometimes have like 2 reviewers. Reviewer 1 reads the paper, and reviewer 2 reads the paper. And each one of them writes their comments, writes their take on those things. They either require you to change specific things in your findings, or go back and redo some experiments because they think there's something wrong with it, or they think there's something that more could be done to view things from different angles. So those reviewers are usually experts in the field. They usually give you their advice on whether this is good paper to go out there, and it's important for people to read that, or there's something wrong that you have to go and fix in that paper. So generally speaking, when you want to go and look up a scientific article, it's essential that you have to see that it's peer reviewed. I mean, there are journals right now which are free of charge to just post out your paper out there, and it's a very beautiful way of getting science at least out there, but it's not peer reviewed. It's called bioRxiv. So bioRxiv has a bunch of papers that are not peer reviewed, that are just sitting there on the internet. I mean,
it's like Wikipedia but for science.
Sure, that's a good way of putting it. But like, it's not necessarily bad, because a lot of those papers are in the process of being peer reviewed, and then they just want to get it out there into the public. So a lot of scientists just usually go and post their papers over there. But those papers you have to take with a grain of salt, because like I've experienced, for example, like looking at some of those papers, and then a few months after the actual article comes out, published in a journal, a peer-reviewed journal, and you're looking at it and the whole thing changed. So yeah, I mean, peer review is an important process. It's when you're looking up something, make sure it's also always peer-reviewed. Most of the things out there are peer-reviewed. Majority of the papers out there are peer-reviewed. It's quite easy to actually check if it's peer-reviewed. Once you pull out a paper, you see on the side it says peer-reviewed, and they tell you by who. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do.
You're talking about how now you can just go online and see some research, which is phenomenal. Because I don't know, I have no clue how you got hands-on research before the internet was a thing. When we were talking before, we were talking about how does social media and the internet impact the neuroscience community, because there's definitely an increase in popularity in neuroscience in the later years. I was wondering, did it impact the scientific community, and more specifically the neuroscience community, the whole access to the internet, social media, Dr. Huberman, for example, how he's a big name in the neuroscience community. So how did that impact the community?
Having things more open access, more available on the internet, creates more accessible information for everyone. Like right now, whatever I'm saying, you can easily go online, fact check me on everything I say. So basically, everything that I mentioned about how the brain functions, how the stroke builds up, or those non-invasive techniques, they're all published research out there. It's very easy for you to pull out the Google Scholar, write what you're interested in, and you'll find millions of articles out there, and you go through them. And some articles could be against what I've just said, for example, and some articles would go along with what I just said. So yeah, it creates more open communication with the scientific community, with the general public, with everyone out there that is involved in the process, or everyone who's curious about the process, or everyone who wants to benefit from the process. So yeah, having the ability to openly communicate with science is key to getting important information out there to public.
Yeah.
It's key to having someone, for example, go on and talk about how, for example, cigarettes are good for you. Like, well, I can do a little bit of research about that and tell you that they're not good for you, for example. That's just a silly example out there. But like, it just makes these kind of information more accessible to the public. It creates more open communication, creates more trust in the public. Podcasts, for example, like what you guys are doing over here, what Huberman is doing, what many other scientists actually they're around the world that talking about different topics of science. I mean, they're very useful because it also creates another platform where you can access information, where you can listen to information. And again, also you have to make sure you always take it by a grain of salt, because not everything you might hear could be accurate, could be sometimes oversimplified, where concepts might look too simple, and that might make it sound wrong to some people or inaccurate. So always refer to our holy grail, which is how we could look up those things, how we could go on and see articles and ensure that whatever is said to us is actually true by reading peer-reviewed articles, by looking at trustworthy resources, and of course asking and listening to qualified people in the field who are able to give input about
assess the information.
Exactly, people with expertise, people with degrees that qualifies them to actually give advice and explain to you what was going on. So those are those resources that are kind of widely available right now around everywhere. You're driving your car, you're listening to podcasts, you're on your phone in the bed, you're opening a paper, you're reading it. This creates great accessibility that I really encourage everyone to go and like.
Since you're on social media, let's say this podcast was to get 100 million views. What is the one thing you want people to know? What's the one thing you learned? It blew your mind. It shifted your paradigm.
Ooh, one thing that I want people to learn. It's a great question.
If it was to be, if this segment of the podcast was just a little TikTok clip, 100 million views, what would you want the one thing people know about neuroscience?
That the brain is highly plastic and highly interchanging to the environment, to the experience that you undergo. So having a positive experience opposed to a negative experience could highly impact the brain, more than you imagine. So the rewiring in the brain, the phenomena of creating new connections or strengthening current connections, that all is fascinating, and the way that it responds to experience, to things that happen around you, to your environment. It's crazy. So I would really want them to know that, increase your positive experience, look at things differently. That will impact how your brain perceives things and how your brain functions. So that creates better experiences, better responses to things, better brain health in general.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So basically, your brain is moldable.
Oh yeah.
Essentially.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
And on a similar topic, what are you would say, the 3 biggest lifestyle changes that you've adapted in your own life through the decade of research you've done so far?
Lifestyle changes. Well, one of them is eating habits. So that's quite important. Like once I learned how my brain and how my body in general responds to food, that's create a big impact on my diet plans. Other things like we just came out of a big pandemic about COVID. That kind of opened our eyes into disease like viruses and bacteria, and how those viruses can transmit from people. So habits like, for instance, being sick and going out in the public, for example. it's not recommended. You don't want to go out and infect other people. But now we
Yeah.
learned in the pandemic that, you know, perhaps if you're sick, stay a little bit at home. Try not to go out too much. That's an example of
Yeah.
things you can apply into your lifestyle that kind of came out from science and research. Other things that I've learned, for instance, exercise. Exercise is crucial for the brain. And it's crucial for the body, and like having the ability to exercise your body to boost that blood supply into the brain, the heart. Because like what I think is that what happens to the heart, what's good for the heart is good for the brain.
Yeah,
So
we've heard that one.
yeah. So basically, when you're exercising, you're increasing the blood flow, blood supply from the heart. You're increasing you're exercising your heart muscle. You're creating this increase in the cardiac function, which could be beneficial for the brain as well. So that's something that also I think is quite important. And I think finally, and the most important one of them, in my opinion, is sleep. Sleep. Adjusting your sleep schedule, because believe it or not, but like sleep affects your brain in many different ways. One way that I can tell you about is right now is that your brain actually cleans itself while you sleep. Oh yeah. So if you have a specific sleep schedule, and for example, you sleep at 10, you wake up at 7 or whatever. If you constantly follow that sleep schedule, your brain undergoes phases of self-cleaning. And that self-cleaning happens by the means of the brain ejecting, or the brain having the CSF, or the cerebral spinal fluid, goes through the ventricles, cleans out different parts of the brain, goes through the brain, flushes the brain out, and generally speaking, and then it gets flushed or drained down through your lymph nodes, through your lymphatic system.
Yeah.
So that is quite important for reducing the chances of neurodegeneration, for example. That if you have an irregular sleep schedule, over time you can start seeing that, you know, your brain health could be declining. Long-term impact, there's been research associating neurodegeneration like dementia with lack of sleep or having bad sleep habits. You know, there could be possibility of tau accumulation that is not cleaned out by this cerebrospinal fluid cycle that happens when you have a consistent sleep schedule. So having an important sleep schedule is quite crucial for your brain health. But like when I say consistent, like sleep at 10, sleep at 10. Don't go at 11, because if you sleep at 11 and you're consistently sleeping at 10 for the past month, that cycle's not going to be efficient.
So consistency is the
is the key.
Oh my god. So when you have bad sleep, your brain is literally dirtier.
Over time, I would say.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So that's great. I did not know that. I mean, of course, you know, everybody knows the effects that good sleep has on you. Higher mood, better brain cognition.
Of course.
It literally cleans it.
Yeah. There's cleaning cycles that happen.
Phenomenal.
That is crazy.
It's phenomenal.
Through everything you've learned, other than sleep cleaning your brain, how does sleep actually affect, like you said, neurodegeneration? Can it happen to younger guys? Can it happen even if you're 16? If you every single night, one night you sleep 2 in the morning, the next day you wake up at 6, like if you have fucked up sleep, how does that affect your brain?
I mean, neurodegeneration in terms of dementia, for example, won't happen overnight, of course.
Yeah.
if it's the reason, or if it's the reason actually that is, or is the cause of neurodegeneration, I think it's going to be accumulation over years, and not even years. But like having the habit of avoiding it, and having the habit of having that regular sleep cycle is not only beneficial for that part, but also, as you mentioned earlier, mood stabilization, the way your brain thinks. So in the short term speaking, not necessarily you will see neurodegeneration, but you will see changes in the way how your brain functions, how it perceives things, how you as a person function daily if you're having that bad sleep schedule. So yeah, but in terms of neurodegeneration, I think that's something more in the long term changes.
And what habits would someone need to implement if they want to have the opposite, so neuroprotection instead of neurodegeneration? What kind of habits would you take in place? Classic good eating, good sleeping,
Sleep, good
exercise.
eat, meditation, exercise, having a positive environment, perceiving things positively, avoiding exogenous stimulants. Those kind of things, I would say, could lower your chances You know, because like neurodegeneration doesn't necessarily happen sporadic.
But it happens.
Right.
Like,
it could be sometimes genetic.
Yeah.
And it could be sporadic, right?
Mhm.
Sporadic, we can, as much as we can, lower our chances of it
Mhm.
developing. You know, some people are at risk more than other people, and that could
Yeah.
be due to.
But let's say I have a lot of Alzheimer's in my family. I have a lot of women who died with Alzheimer's. Like, is there something I can do to lower my chances?
Right. I mean, that answer would to know if you're actually at risk or not. That could be answered by a geneticist, so
Mhm.
someone who's specialized in genetics,
Okay.
or knows how the genes in your family history is transferred, and
Mhm.
if you're actually at risk or not. So it's important for you to go and check it out. But yeah, if you have something in the family and you're at risk of developing those genes that could create neurodegeneration in any form, then definitely you should like go and ask a doctor and the ways on how you can prevent it or lower the chance of it
Mhm.
happening. If it's not something genetic, it could be something sporadic, and as I was saying, you could always lower your chances by implementing those healthy habits, healthy
Mhm.
lifestyles, so to lower the probability of neurodegeneration of actually happening.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Do you have anything else to add?
This is an episode complete of information.
Yeah. Seriously, I have to be really, really grateful for your presence here today. You added so much content and so much value for our I was going to say clients, but for our viewers. I was like, clients, like a big business guy. I really want to thank you for being here today. I really hope that the viewers got a lot of information. I know they did. Seriously, hope we can see you again, and I think we can wish ourselves a good episode.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's
No problem, man.
a pleasure being on this podcast. It's a lovely podcast.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So there it is.
All right, thank you so much for watching. Really hope you guys got great value from this. Go follow us on social media. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, the usual stuff. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and see you out there.
Wow, that was great. Mom is happy we can give her back
Great. The house.